We're talking to Adrian Naun directly from Texas. How you doing, Adrian? How is Texas right now? Very cold?
It is very cold. A pleasure to be here.
Okay, last time we speak, we were talking about the coronavirus and this pandemic was just starting. But right now we want to talk and we want to address a very important thing. I've been talking to friends of mine, people very intelligent, people not that intelligent too, and asking people what they think about the vaccine, because my concern is I was diagnosed with cancer 12 years ago. I'm free of cancer. I'm a cancer survivor. But I was thinking about having the vaccine, and I began to search, and there was not much information about it. And I want you first of all to talk a little bit about you, your background, what are you doing right now, and why are we talking about this with you? And let's start with that.
I just graduated from the University of Texas at San Antonio, here at UTSA, and I acquired a bachelor's degree in biology. I have some background in terms of research, both at St. Mary's University, which was my previous institution before I transferred to UTSA. I worked with an organism, Mycoplasma pneumonia. After I transferred to UTSA, I worked at the Texas Biomedical Research Institute, where we worked with Mycobacterium tuberculosis, also a respiratory pathogen. And currently I am affiliated with the University of Texas at San Antonio, and I continue to do research. So my ultimate goal in terms of career would be to pursue an MD PhD. So that's the physician scientist route. So therefore I would be able to combine both research with clinical practice.
Perfect. Right now we're facing this pandemic with at least we know 5 vaccines. There is the Russian, there is one from China, there is the Indian one from AstraZeneca, and right here in the US we have 2 types of vaccines, at least right now, because Johnson & Johnson's just released today is January 13, that they already have some very good foreseen to have the vaccine of Johnson & Johnson very soon on their market. I mean, everything is happening so fast. How can you describe these new vaccines?
So I would describe these vaccines as novel because most of the mechanisms of action are absolutely new. There are classical vaccines, and I would like to get into that a little bit just to explain some background information. And the mechanism of action for the vaccines that we're observing right now are very innovative. So essentially, the purpose of a vaccine would be to halt the spread of infectious diseases. That's the general purpose behind a vaccine. And there are 4 main classes of vaccines with both strengths and weaknesses. So I will concentrate before I get into the discussion with the newer vaccines, some of the classic examples of a vaccine. And so the first type is a live attenuated vaccine, which consists of a weakened version of the original bacterium or pathogen, depending on the type of vaccine that we're talking about. Some examples of those include the MMR vaccine, which is very well known. That's the measles, mumps, rubella vaccine. There's also BCG vaccine, which is part of my field of expertise with tuberculosis. It stands for Bacillus calmette-guerin. Among some of the limitations for live attenuated is that they're not administered to pregnant women or immunocompromised patients. The second type of vaccine that I wanted to get into and provide some background information is an inactivated vaccine, in which the pathogen has been completely destroyed via chemicals, heat, or radiation. Now, this is completely safe for pregnant women and immunocompromised patients, but the limitation essentially is that it requires multiple doses because it elicits a weaker response compared to the live attenuated. So those are classical examples. There are also toxoid vaccines, recombinant, conjugated, and capsular, but that's a little bit more complex, and for the purpose of the newer vaccines, I just concentrated on those two. So as you were asking, there are essential similarities between some of the vaccines, such as the Pfizer vaccine and Moderna's vaccine. Those are referred to as mRNA vaccines. The so-called mRNA vaccines will target an essential process which is referred to in molecular biology as central dogma. The central dogma states that every living organism will begin with DNA, which would be transcribed into messenger RNA to then reach the protein stage. That's essentially for every living organism. So the way how the vaccine works in this case is that the messenger RNA contains essentially a set of instructions from DNA. So it indicates a ribosome, which is an organelle within the cell, which type of protein it has to synthesize. And it's essentially like a cooking recipe. It contains the instructions and it tells which type of recipe we're going to be cooking. So in the case of the Pfizer and Moderna's vaccine, the instructions, the cooking recipe, would be the spike protein. The reason behind it, because the spike protein in coronavirus is essential for binding to the host receptor. Essentially what the vaccine is doing is that it's telling the cell to synthesize or cook this recipe, which is a spike protein, so that in future events, if an individual becomes exposed to the virus, they would have developed adaptive immunity and therefore it would protect against coronavirus.
We talked last time, you told me that it was going to be very difficult to make a vaccine because inside, as you call it, like the recipe for making the more of this virus is not a DNA, it's an RNA, is half of the DNA. So every time it gets into an individual, maybe in several individuals, it will mutate, it will change. But as I see right now, as you explain it, the virus has these spikes, and the spikes are more or less the same, okay, independently of the mutation of the virus. That will go to my other question, like there's another coronavirus in South Africa, there's one in UK, there's a new one in China. So does this type of new vaccines work with any type of the spikes this coronavirus develop?
That is an excellent question. And that's one of the first questions I had as soon as it was determined that there was a second strain of the virus. There has been some experimentation done, and it has been determined based on data recently that it protects against both the UK strain and the regular coronavirus strain, which is the causative agent for the pandemic. Now, there's no experimental evidence yet regarding the Oxford vaccine, and as far as I know, currently there's no information regarding the Russian vaccine either. So it could be cross-protective and indeed neutralize both strains, as it is in the case of a Moderna and Pfizer vaccine, but we're lacking some sort of information still, as this strain is relatively new. Something that I wanted to talk about is that I was frankly concerned with the emergence of a second strain, which is deemed as more contagious, at least for the moment, because viruses normally do undergo mutations, but they're referred to as non-functional mutations, which means that it doesn't affect the pathogenesis or the interactions with the host. But these types of mutation in particular are concerning because they could be more contagious.
I understand that. Now, since we have different type of, different companies doing the vaccines, do they do the same recipe for the vaccine, or they have different like ways to get there? I know that a lot of people concerned right now for not having the vaccine, which I encourage people to have it, since if there was a vaccine for cancer, I will have it, because I know, since I'm a cancer survivor, that you don't want to go there, you know? So I urgently tell people, you should ask your physician first, talk to your family and decide what you want to do. I don't think that it's mandatory to do things unless you want to travel maybe to another country, and that country will tell you, well, listen, you need to have these vaccines, so we can let you in. But if you live in America, you can choose, or you live in UK, or you live in India, you can choose to have it or not. Depends on what your physician said. Always talk to them. But the question was, what about kids? What about pregnant women or people with immunodeficiencies? Or, that's a tricky one. Like, what should I do?
Oh, I absolutely agree with you. It should be consulted with a physician before taking any sort of decision, so that the pros and cons can be assessed before taking a final deliberation. In fact, in the US, we're currently observing a resurgence of the infections, and that essentially reflects the social interactions during the holiday season. In fact, I believe December was the deadliest month of the pandemic. And a message that I would like to relay for both young people and healthy individuals is that no one is invulnerable to serious consequences from the condition. And so it should be consulted with a physician. Now, to answer your question directly, in terms of women, pregnant women, there are no studies yet regarding pregnant women. So it definitely has to be consulted with the physician to assess both the pregnancy stage, if there are any potential risks or consequences from the vaccine. For immunocompromised patients, it's a similar situation depending on the company that has developed the vaccine. It might be feasible for some, but then not for others. There is still not a lot of information regarding the safety concerns for at least immunocompromised patients and pregnant women. For children, it's absolutely safe to get vaccinated, so that's not a concern yet. But we're still lacking some more information, some more experimentation, and since those are relatively newer vaccines, there will have to be more experiments to collect the data and assess if it is safe for immunocompromised patients and pregnant women, depending on the consequences. You were also mentioning the recipe, and to answer that question, no. So the Moderna and Pfizer vaccine has a similar mechanism of action because it is the so-called mRNA vaccine, but both the Russian vaccine and the Oxford vaccine rely on something referred to as an adenovirus vector. So essentially what they do, they take the causative agent from the cold, the common cold, that's not a completely lethal sort of vector. And so they genetically modify it so that it cannot replicate, and they insert some of the genes from the coronavirus, and therefore it acts essentially as a vector to spread that genetic information in multiple cells. And since it has been modified and removed that capability to replicate, then it's not infectious anymore. And it's creating a long-lasting adaptive immune response to protect against any future exposures of the pathogen. Some of the vaccines, in fact, most of them will require multiple doses. The immunization time varies according to each vaccine, as well as the temperature properties. Some are temperature stringent compared to others. They have some dissimilarities, but the efficacy for both Moderna's and Pfizer's vaccine is at least 94% and 100% effective. I think it was Moderna against severe manifestations of the virus.
Okay, now I'm gonna give you tough questions, right? I'm gonna do the tough one first. Can they put you a chip or 5G or something like that through a vaccine? I mean, I have to ask, because some people have this things on the internet that they will know where you are or something like that, or you want to have 5G or whatever. Can they actually do that?
They cannot do that because they would require a different sort of approach, and it wouldn't be essentially a vaccine. So those are unsubstantiated pseudoscientific claims in nature, and the vaccines are completely safe. They have undergone clinical trials, and I can speak about both Moderna's and Pfizer's vaccine. They have followed the approval and regulations in order to be deemed safe. So it's definitely a concern in the pseudoscientific realm, but it's essentially unsubstantiated.
What about if I already think I have it? Because, a lot of people, well, I think I already had it, but since when I had it, I didn't have access to testing, and testing is still, hard to do, or you don't trust 100% of testing. A person that thinks I already had it should have the vaccine, or no, I already had it, so I don't need it. And the second question will be, what if I'm healthy, I don't need it? Some people say I'm healthy, I haven't had any of this vaccine type of disease or flu or whatever, I never get that, so I don't need it. So what do you think about that? Can you say if a person is healthy or think they already had it and didn't happen that much? What can you say about that?
One thing that I wanted to mention, even if the person got infected, but it was never determined via testing, either PCR or antibody testing, and they couldn't confirm that the person was infected with coronavirus, even if they did have it, it would be important to get the vaccination, because a different type of strain might originate at some point, just like the UK, and the vaccine might be cross-protective for both the hypothetical strain, the UK strain, as well as the normal original strain that we were facing when the pandemic started. So I would highly recommend for someone, even if they did not get tested, get the vaccine, because it's not going to do any harm, especially if they already had the condition. It's going to act via a type of immunity, which is referred to as adaptive immunity, which is acquired following exposure to a pathogen. So the vaccine is essentially going to do no harm, even if the person already got infected and just didn't know about it. Now, the second question, someone thinks that they're healthy and they shouldn't get the vaccine. That's essentially what I have been able to observe from teenagers and younger population. No, my immune system's fine, I'm still young, I'll be okay. My answer to that would be yes, you might be okay, because statistics show that most of younger adults and teenagers have been asymptomatic for the condition or don't have many complications. The problem with that is that they can become spreaders. And if they're completely asymptomatic, they will continue to spread the condition to people that might be seriously injured as a result of contracting the disease. So my recommendation would be to get it, either if you're healthy or if you think that you're not at risk to contract the virus. Because this is a matter of public health, essentially, and we are protecting other citizens.
Now, what about it's too fast? I mean, some people say it's too fast. How can they make this so fast? A regular vaccine will take 3 to 4 years if they're lucky, but sometimes it takes like 10 or 15 years to get a vaccine and the trials and everything. How can they did it so fast? I know that. Can you tell us? The coronavirus is not new. Coronavirus is with us, and there have been studies of coronavirus for years. And I think I heard some interview during the pandemic last week from the BBC that some people, some researchers were investigating MERS, the COVID, similar to COVID, spikes. So they were like 2 or 3 years in advance of the spikes. What can you tell about that?
Correct. The scientific community was not starting from scratch. There were multiple studies regarding MERS and SARS by the time coronavirus originated. And so therefore, some of the experimental evidence has been used as a tool and asset to develop this sort of new approach for the vaccination process. And the reason behind the vaccine being developed so fast was, number one, that they were not starting from scratch, as you mentioned, and number two, the funding opportunities, not only in the US, but in multiple countries. Funding's normally a limitation in terms of developing a vaccine, but with such unprecedented times, most of the funding has been devoted to developing a newer vaccine, and that funding has also helped develop novel approaches in order to fight back the coronavirus pandemic.
Well, Adrian, this is very helpful for us. I know you're gonna give me some other opinions about it, and we are going to keep on talking about this, because this is just developing. Only 10 million people in the US have been vaccinated, and not everybody is being vaccinated twice, because you need to have the two vaccines between 15 days or 20 days or a month. It depends what your physician said. As I told you before, talk to your physician, talk to your doctor, talk to your family, get together and think about this. I hope this has been helpful for you. Thank you, Adrian. We're gonna do this in Spanish too, so people that speak Spanish can get this.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me here.
Thank you.